fantastic turnout. It's really good. I've got a fair amount of stuff to get through today because Lynn asked me to talk about the history of natural building in New Zealand. And the trouble is that history is not linear. Is this thing, is this the worky thing, is it?
Yes.
Technical. Where do I point it anyway?
Not that way.
So I need help already. How's this thing going? Oh, there we go. That's all right. Yeah. Probably if the lights are down a bit, it'll brighten up the slides a bit. Is that okay for you guys? Yeah. So the only story I can really tell is my own. I'm not a historian, and I do know that history is definitely not linear. It comes from snippets, it comes from clues, it comes warts and all. It meanders, it zigzags, it loops around, and so does my story, really, about how I found out about natural building in New Zealand, at least the future as well. So, we'll go backwards, sideways, we'll amble around, let's see where it gets us through. Because one of the interesting things about putting this talk together was I've had to do a great deal of thinking about what's happened, both to me and more generally. And I do have some extraordinarily early memories when I was a child. One of my early memories is a very vivid encounter with mud that I had when I was about 2. I might have been slightly older, certainly wasn't 3. But my mother had taken me to the shops and was walking me home, and we passed a bulldozer sitting on a building site. It wasn't working, it was just sitting there parked. Fantastic. I liked that. So when my mother got home, she had to have a rest. So I thought, now's my chance. I knew I'd worked out how to open the gate latch that was meant to keep me in. And I escaped from home, I ran up the road about 500 metres or so, and I climbed on this great big bulldozer, and I was having the best time. And I pushed a button, the cigarette. Because I just absolutely freaked out. I leapt off the bulldozer into a puddle of mud, where I got stuck. I couldn't move. I was up to, I don't know how deep I was, but I couldn't move. And I couldn't pull my feet out, and I had brand new gum boots on, which I knew I couldn't lose, so it was a very, very sticky and tricky situation. But a passing neighbour pulled me out anyway, took me home. I don't know what happened when I got home. Anyway, I made tree huts and, underground huts. It was great. My father taught me to use tools. And my father was an interesting influence too, because I thought he was a silly old bugger, but it's technical too. He thought that if pesticides harm insects and plants, that they'd harm us too. Not about. And then, of course, Rachel Carson's Silent Spring came out in 1968. And my mother, she told me stories about building her house, her childhood house, when she was a child. They fascinated me too, because the first thing that happened, she remembered, was builders arriving with very big bolts of timber. And they dug a pit, and they pit sawed all the wood for her house. And then the painters turned up with pots of linseed oil and white lead and mixed up paint. But anyway, up to the Second World War, the whole world, New Zealand was pretty much organic. Materials used in houses were mostly pretty benign natural stuff. And there was lead, as I've mentioned, as one of the major nasties. But then, I ended up at architecture school. So for some reason I thought if I ever grew up I'd become an architect. But I don't remember a great deal about architecture school actually, but I nearly got heaved out a couple of times. One time so I wrote an essay about Eeyore's house. Eeyore from the house at Per Corner by AML. Because Eeyore had this fabulous theory about how to build a house. You put a roof up first. That's the way to build a house. And I still advise my straw bale clients that way. But I also put in an entry for high-rise gnome. It was a serious housing competition held in Lower Hutt, it's known as a garden city. So I thought it needed a name, it needed a high-rise name. And I got into real trouble over that. The only trouble was that the mayor of Lower Hutt actually liked it. Wanted to give me a prize, but he couldn't because I had to pay me $5 entry fee. So the 60s and the 70s, the period I grew up in, it's great. We're still there, in many ways. But the term natural building, it's really a construct that came out of the 70s. I mean, Bruce alluded to that last night himself. I mean, you remember some of the things that were around, some of us are old enough. Sex, drugs and rock and roll. I was talking to a teenager the other day, he said, well, we didn't have AIDS. We couldn't imagine such a world. It was really good. But we had nuclear-free New Zealand, which was a fantastic thing that happened in the 70s. We also had the 70s oil shock. A great deal of alternative thought, a great deal of thought was given to alternatives. There was the term, Timothy Leary, he popularised the turn on, tune in and drop out phrase. But later he rethought that as the drop out, turn on and drop in, which is probably really more what we did. But we thought the world was changing for the better. A great deal of thought went on to how we could improve things. And here we are. Not quite the results we anticipated in the 70s, but the roots of what we've got are there. Bruce alluded to this too. It was also a very pivotal book. The Whole Earth Catalogue came out in 1968, and that's where the idea of appropriate technology came around. That sort of pragmatic environmentalism, which is really what we as architects, engineers, builders do. We know we have to use stuff. We know it has an impact taking that stuff. We know what we use with it has an impact. There was an Earth Day, the first Earth Day, is still held from time to time, so in 1970. I think globally, locally, that was also a term of the 70s. It's possibly incongruous, but I still believe that localisation is critical, but you have to keep an eye on the whole picture. So this is sort of, background stuff. I mean, in the 70s, it was a great time of exploration and inventiveness on many fronts. We devised the so-called alternatives. There was interest in vernacular architecture, and a whole host of really good books came out. And Bruce also had one of these shown yesterday. I mean, we were sharing the same stuff around the world, really. It had an influence here and in other places. Shelter by Louis Kahn was a great book. Learn to Build Home by Ken Kern was interesting. But a lot of work happened on energy and environmental matters. A lot of work on passive solar design. This book, Energy Primer, was an interesting one. A client actually showed me a copy of it the other day. I used to have one in the 70s. The most interesting thing I found about it was you could actually publish it today. You'd hardly have to change a word. It's completely relevant stuff that was thought about then. The problem is what happened in the 80s and 90s, which really sort of stuffed up these initiatives. But permaculture was started by Bill Mollison and David Holmgren. And for my sins, I did a stint in the Ministry Works. I worked in the Power Division. I worked on a couple of big hydro schemes for a short while. Manapuri Hydro Power Scheme was being designed when I was there. And it was a scheme to dam a pristine lake in the bottom of the South Island and raise the level of the lake and destroy the shoreline and its whole environment. The Save Manapuri campaign was launched then. It was really the start of the birth, it's really regards the birth of modern conservation movement. A lot of environmentalism that's happened in New Zealand was born with this campaign. It was the largest petition in New Zealand history. It was over 260,000 signatures. And out of a population of what would have been then around 3 million, 3.5 million, it was an enormous effort. I mean, we were running around the Ministry of Works building putting up Save Manapuri stickers. And the engineers in the office next door were designing the dam. Well, my wife has a different take on that period. She was a cleaner in the Ministry of Works at the time, came in at nights to clean the offices. They went on strike. I remember them going on strike. And after 2 days, their pay went up and our offices got cleaned again. I was not to actually meet her for another 22 years. She still doesn't clean our office. Still a shambles. Anyway, the new Plymouth Power Station was another scheme that we're working on. It was to be coal-fired, and even then I remember there was huge issues around the amount of CO2 was going to come out of that power station. So anyway, moving along. In 1971, I was a student at the School of Architecture. I took a year or two off, and I met a woman called Yvonne Rust, who was a potter. She wanted a house made of local raw materials. It's a long story, but I ended up designing this house and helping build it. And I'm not ever going to add a hardwood floor again. But yeah, the photo at the top right I took was taken in the 70s. The photo at the bottom I just took last year. I drove up, I didn't know who owned the house. I didn't know what had happened to it at all. And I drove up and I found it being modified a little bit, quite nicely. And the owner sort of popped out and said, "Oh, I've always wanted to meet you." Which is one of the nicest things that anyone has ever said to me. She said, "Not a day goes by that I don't thank you for this beautiful house." So that's really sweet. So yeah, anyway, the 1970s again. You know, I was a potter. I became a potter after hanging around with potters. The photo in the middle was in the New Zealand Women's Weekly. I bumped the royal family. So somehow or other I made a career out of clay. Yeah. So anyway, humans turned up in Aotearoa, New Zealand, around 1,000 years ago. And there was a land that was what's happened, was there Samiko or something? A land that was deeply forested with rainforest, an extraordinary collection of indigenous and native trees, birds, insects, reptiles. No mammals except for a couple of little bats. The Maori story I'll leave to Rowan Hoskins, who's going to follow me. But the initial European interest in New Zealand was really because of these great kauri trees. And the interest was really there because British wanted it for their warships. So New Zealand was wanted by the British for military supply reasons, really. That's why they really, really wanted to get hold of these forests. But there are also fur seals, whales to be hunted, and a fantastic opportunity to escape 19th century Europe. I mean, I'm sure all of us fantasize if there's a place we could go to, we could get away from now. Pretty good thing to do. But we can't escape this earth anymore. Not easily. But anyway, one of the great natural phenomena of early New Zealand was native bird song. In fact, it was 19th century tourism was organised around coming to New Zealand to hear the morning chorus. It's called the morning chorus, the bird song in the morning. It's just absolutely fabulous. Very rapid forest loss led again to one of our very early conservation environmental movements. The Forest and Bird Society was formed in 1923. And this little bird on the right is a waka waka, a fantail. I call him Chirpy. Uncharacteristically, he sings like a canary and he visits me every day, inside and outside both houses we've got and around the garden. He helped me write this story. Great influence. But anyway, we'll get on to the guts of it now. Natural building. When people arrived in New Zealand, they came by sea and they sailed up the rivers and into the harbours. They went as far as they could take their boats, basically. And here's a very typical impediment to further voyaging inland. The whole settlement of New Zealand doesn't make sense until you look at it as being done from the sea. But this area is in Kirikiri, it's in the Bay of Islands, and it's one of the earliest areas settled by Europeans, and they arrived there in the early 1800s. And this photo shows some of New Zealand's oldest buildings. New Zealand's oldest building. It's not our oldest structure, but it's our oldest building, 1821-22. Local Maori. The first settlers came, they needed the help of the local Maori. build shelters of wood, reed, grass, bark, before more permanent buildings could be made. But then this house here, the main one here, Kemp House, it's a substantial European home, and it's built by Maori and European carpenters, and it's hardly changed over the years. The little church on the hill, it dates from a little later, it's from 1878. But yeah, there was lots and lots of timber here, and a lot of buildings happened out of timber. In the 19th century, there's all sorts of different stuff happened all over the place, from fairly substantial buildings to quirky. Some European settlers bought small prefabricated houses with them, or small windows ready to install in a new house. And most people had to rely on the local stuff. And it was rapidly discovered that these buildings were actually good to have given earthquakes, because New Zealand sits on the junction of two tectonic plates. And the earthquake drill yesterday wasn't really given lightly, because as we all know, there's been some quite severe earthquakes in this area quite recently. But yes, some really big structures happened. This is the old government buildings, it's in Wellington, it's built in 1876. It was the largest timber building in the southern hemisphere. It was the second largest timber building in the world until 1998, when this enormous timber arena was built in Japan. The only building that better was this temple in Japan, to Oji in Nara, which was started about 1790. That government building used to hold the entire New Zealand government civil service. I wish they could stick that back in here now. But yeah, prior to that, there wasn't the first government house built in New Zealand was actually watched indoor. Some stakes were driven into the ground, saplings worked between them, made a sort of gabion-like basket, clay was pelted onto it and smoothed off. So there's a really diverse range of timber buildings. I mean, you wander around any part of New Zealand and most of the buildings you see will be timber framed, made from the sort of 19th century stuff at the top to 20th century stuff on the bottom. You know, it goes from minuscule, straight, stick framed, usually clad with weatherboard or corrugated iron roof. Sometimes got brick cladding, sometimes shingles, sometimes a tile roof, or even occasionally an earth-covered roof. So you wander around the birds, and there's just different stuff all over the place, nearly all of it stick frame timber. And up to, I guess around about 1950 or so, it was all native timber and it was untreated and it was good, durable timber. But there's some roundwood used, but yeah, so stick is the major thing. Yeah, it's great. I mean, I used some roundwood in my own house. It's a wonderful thing when the carpenter or the builder helping me says, "Where are the roof rafters?" to give him a chainsaw. Go. But yeah, a real problem that faces a lot of us in the natural building world is that Pinus radiata from North America was planted here in very large forests. And it grows extraordinarily well here and it grows very fast here, but it is not durable and it's not resistant to insect attacks, so it generally has to be filled with toxins to make it usable. And trying to find sources that find timbers that are naturally durable is a little more tricky, and there are some compliance issues. Anyway, building for permanence. I mean, there's New Zealand, not a great deal of use is made of stone. Sometimes as a cladding or a veneer, but there still is a tradition of stone buildings. They're usually for buildings regarded as wanting to reflect permanence or solidity. Institutions, things like parliament buildings, prisons, major courthouses, some churches. But even within them, the roofs often employed extremely fine timber work. There are also some very fine and elegant, largely timber buildings built, very major buildings. And curiously enough, I mean, some of the detailing of the old timber buildings was made to look a little bit like they were made of stone, with sort of coins on the corner and sorts of details to make them look like not quite what they are. But our stone buildings, this was the building that was in the previous shot I showed you from Kerikeri. It's a storehouse. It's called the Stone Store. New Zealand's great at names, you know, Stone Store, North Island, South Island. You know, can't get lost. Well, this dates from 1832. It was mostly made by an Australian convict stonemason who actually brought Sydney sandstone over here. There's also used some local volcanic rock. Seashells were burnt for lime for the mortar. The construction of the building was completed in 1836, and it was really built because the missionaries wanted a vermin-free, fireproof area for supplies and provisions. But again, all around New Zealand, there is a collection of quite interesting, some quite quirky stone buildings. Here we've got a Masonic Hall, a post office, and a church. These are all actually in the South Island, these ones, Lower South Island. Some of them not very far from here. But one of the interesting things I had putting this talk together was, I've been through, I've got thousands and thousands of photos, and I was looking through them trying to find what I thought were appropriate photos. Of course, any photo I could probably talk about now on each one, but this is the short version, we hope. But I've actually used stone in quite a lot of buildings myself. And I was quite surprised because I never thought of myself as a stoner. Anyway, these are actually some buildings I've been involved with, which involve the Coromandel granite, Northern Greywanky, Centro Tagaroo stone and Oamaru limestone. But we'll go back to the other great strand of natural building in New Zealand, which is earth building. And this is our oldest surviving earth building, Montpellier House. It was constructed 1841-42. It's by French priests using pisé de terre, round earth. And it's got a very fat walls, thick walls on the lower story, and the upper story is round earth between studs. And seashells off the nearby beach were burnt for lime for plaster, possibly used some for clay stabilisation, native timber shingles on the roof. It wasn't a house at all, it was a factory. It was a tannery, a bindery, and a printery. It produced leather-bound Bibles. And one of our other iconic earth buildings from the 19th century is this one, Broad Green Cob, top of the South Island. Built in 1856. It's been through several earthquakes. It's a lovely building. There is a story, I don't know if it's true or not, that the room in the middle of the upper floor may have been when the original owner kept his daughter locked up out of harm's way. Bit grim. So all around New Zealand in the 19th century, a lot of earth buildings were put up, often in the drier parts of the country. New Zealand is a wet country, but there are some dry areas. And these are very typical buildings, little couple of settlers' cottages. The top one dates from about 1855, and it was round earth. The one on the bottom dates from around 1880. A friend of mine lives in it, and he has a double bed in there with a sign above the double bed that says vacancy. So, any young women want to live in an earth house? I know where they would be welcome. There's also a little sod house here at the bottom. There are not many sod buildings in New Zealand, but that's one of them. Essential buildings also built using local materials, a couple of pubs. We reckon in the 19th century there were about somewhere between 6,000 to 8,000 buildings of made of earth. And I think around 600 of those still remain. A lot of them came to grief in the Second World War when there was a shortage of steel for the war effort, and roofs were taken off buildings that weren't in use, and the buildings did what people were scared of, they washed away in the rain. architecturally, the 1940s, 50s, there are a few buildings. One on the top left there is a little cottage that a woman built, an extraordinary tower, building this little adobe cottage. Up at the top of the North Island. In the middle of the North Island is some people came back from the Second World War. Davy Jones came back in the Middle East. The Second World War was determined to build a house without a mortgage, and he'd seen Earth Building and said that I can do that. So we'll throw Earth House on the top right there. Pip Alley was an engineer in Christchurch, engineering school. He was really concerned at the loss of native timber forests caused by house building, and he had done a lot of work with something stabilising road bases, and he built several round earth houses around Christchurch, and there's a bunch of them built around Wellington. There's at the bottom there too. Pip Alley actually gave me the soil mix for my first round earth house. Again, the 60s were a pretty bleak period. In the 70s, there were 4 houses built of earth in New Zealand. There's the one I've shown you already that I was involved with. And there are 3 others. There's a pressed earth brick house in the far north, Pam Laybourne. The one on the right is a pressed earth brick house built by Philip Wollaston. He went on to become a local mayor and cabinet minister in the Labour government. And there's also a round earth house in the Riverside community, again at the top of the South Island. I'm not sure if that was the very first house this picture is of, but it's similar. But yeah, the 1980s were really the start of the Renaissance, the use of natural materials. We've been through that period of the 70s I alluded to, looking for alternatives, but in the 80s it sort of started to pick up a bit. The 2 pictures at the top, a lovely little cottage built by Richard Bella Walker, top of the South Island. I did a round earth house with Taster Upstream as the engineer. That picture at the bottom left is the building of the house. It was done in it's contractor built, but done in a fairly laborious way. And the building on the bottom right was a owner built house. That's one of the few buildings that I've been involved with that's ever been demolished. It was purchased by someone who actually turned out detested Earth Building and bought the site, not the house, and had the house removed. So there's a big variety of earth buildings all around New Zealand. I don't know how many there are. I'd hesitate to guess, but there'd be some hundreds. They've proliferated many different styles and material types. There's range there. I mean, this house has been shown already in some pictures, but it's up for sale at the moment. If you've got many millions of dollars, you can buy it. It's actually built in mud brick, the structural walls. It's got stone veneer cladding, recycled hardwood beams, natural timbers, and earth floors. It's a stunning location. It's probably the most, in dollar terms, would be the most valuable natural materials house in the country. I don't know what its price would be, but it's probably about 10 million. I wish you could get a cut when the house resold. Anyway, and here's a very eclectic house that shows total architectural confusion. It's got everything in it. It's my own house. Yeah. Now you know why the building inspector was not sure. But yeah, it's got mud brick, it's got straw bale, cordwood bottles, light earth walls, earth floors, earth plaster ceilings, recycled joinery, reused hardwood poles and beams, natural timbers. Nice house to live in, actually. Yeah, plasters, earth plasters, I mean that's become another one of our happy techniques. We've got some wonderful plasterers here and a whole range of styles, techniques, tried, used. And anyway, here we come to the guts of it. This is New Zealand's first straw bale building. It was built in 1993 by Peter Kundicki, who was a landscape architect actually. This is the top of the South Island. So we can claim a 23-year-old tradition of straw bale building. Beat that. Others here, haven't they? Anyway, what did I do? anything honest. I need help. Anyway, I'll carry on a little bit in the woods. The pictures might catch up. We hope. Anyway, yeah, I mean, straw bale buildings have been built really all over New Zealand. The top of the, from Northland at the top of the North Island to Southland at the bottom of the South Island. I did mention interesting New Zealand names, didn't I? And many places in between. Are we trying to get the pictures back?
Yeah, I'm trying.
Good, good.
Trying to find eight, really.
And all straw bales have been built by professionals, they've been built by owner builders, sort of a wide variety of styles. Some have had direct cement plasters, cement-based plasters put on them. Some direct line plasters, some earth plasters. Don't you love it? This technology stuff. Fantastic, thank you. Thanks very much. So anyway, yeah, those buildings are located from the, say, the far north to the far south of the country. Yeah, the one on the top left there was built by a professional straw bale design and build company. They call themselves Sustainable Structures. The top right was an owner-built and pioneer tour, had direct line plasters on it, little house. Bottom left was professionally built in Waiheke Island, which is an island off the coast from Auckland. It had direct line plasters on it. And the house on the bottom right, it was professionally built with cement-based plasters over a cavity in Christchurch. So I'm not going to talk a lot about straw bale because there's lots of other people who are going to be talking about straw bale here. But here's a couple of images of a couple of relatively new ones. The top one was professionally built with earth and lime plasters. It's Philip Kennedy's house, you see somewhere. There's some direct plasters, some cavities. The bottom two is a house built professionally, direct lime cement plaster, and it's in Southland. And these sorts of interiors are the sorts of interiors you see in natural buildings, earth buildings, straw bale buildings all around the world. They range from the funky to the really sophisticated. It's really, you get a really nice light coming through some of these windows, and it's really tempting to take photos, and I didn't want to show a slideshow of 1,000 shots of light coming through windows. But they do look nice. And yeah, it's a little small and charming straw bale building that Min Hall designed for herself. It's the only straw bale building in New Zealand yet to receive an Architect's Award, as far as I'm aware. Got an NZIA regional award a few years back. So I'm not going to talk much more about straw bale building. I'll leave that to those who've got other stories to tell. But Min did do some research for a Masters of Architecture thesis in 2012, and this is really an interesting image of hers. The top graph shows all dwelling consents issued by Nelson City Council and Tasman District Council, there's an area at the top of the South Island, over a 20-year period. The vertical scale on the top graph is calibrated in hundreds of buildings. Okay. The graph at the bottom shows the number of dwellings in these totals that were built with either earth or straw bale. Its vertical scale is calibrated in twos. Hear that? So as a proportion of total consents, the earth and straw bale buildings issued represent about 0.1 to 2% of the total consents issued. I don't think that area is actually totally representative of all of New Zealand, but I would guess that the number of straw bale buildings we have around now is probably somewhere between 200 and 300. But another interesting statistic that Min teased out of this was that 75% of those 144 houses in that steel. There used to be hydraulic lime kilns located very close to where I live, in Warkworth, and hydraulic lime is lime that sits underwater. And manufacturing started in New Zealand in 1851, but the ruins on the left, they date from 1856. And then a crowd, people known as the Wilson brothers, set up a Portland cement work in 1883. Again in Warkworth. And by the late 1890s, Portland cement manufacturing was well established. And very shortly after that, about a third of the cement used here was locally made, and by 1920 almost all cement used in New Zealand was locally produced. So the ruins on the right date from about the 1930s, when a more efficient cement manufacturing plant was established up further north. It's still going. But this cement plant then went on to manufacture hydraulic lime for some time after it stopped making Portland cement. But now there's no hydraulic lime made in New Zealand, as far as I'm aware. We do have hydrated lime and we have burnt lime. That's available for us to use. But if we want our hydraulic lime, we have no choice but to use Portland cement in New Zealand. And up till recently, most of the cement was made here, was made locally, but they've just closed down the cement works in the South Island. And now a lot of our cement is going to be imported again from Japan. But yeah, it's impossible to see a modern world without the use of cement and steel. I just can't imagine what it would look like. But that's actually a challenge, isn't it? I've thought I'd done quite a lot of work trying to get cement out of buildings myself. I gave up the other day when I heard that China has produced more cement in the last 3 years than the United States has produced in its entire history. What's that? 15 minutes. Okay, we'll speed up. Anyway, Bill Gates had a take on this. He said, why would I look at Bill Gates? I don't know. But he was happy that mud floors replaced the concrete floors, produced the world's poorest homes, improved the world's poorest homes, improved sanitation. He also added that paving streets boost land and rental values, school enrolment, and overall economic activity, and also includes access to credit. Access to credit means incurring debt, and that's great for the youngsters. But anyway, how we get cement and steel amounts reduced, I mean, that's what Bruce was talking about last night. We have to think of the alternatives. Christchurch earthquakes, Heather's going to talk about these, but pretty much old masonry buildings behaved as was anticipated. Stone buildings, brick buildings, bottom shots from a cob building, shook itself to death. Some buildings did okay. The 19th century earth building at the top left there was one of our largest earth buildings in New Zealand, probably certainly in the South Island. It was savable, but its owners wanted it demolished. It was an excuse to get rid of an old building, so that building came down. The straw building on the right-hand side there was fared very well, didn't suffer any damage. The straw building in the bottom on the bottom left there survived an earthquake in the North Island, unharmed a couple of years ago. So I mean, unfortunately, a straw bale building near that one fell to bits, but it had been incredibly badly built. Of course. Anyway, as I mentioned before, Yvonne Rust was my first client. Here she is. She inspired the creation of e-bands. She wanted people to be able to talk to councils. So we started this e-bands about 30 years ago. Tace and others here were from those early days of getting this outfit going. Really, one of our major works is we did write official earth building standards. They're published in 1998. That was a 6-week project, it only took us 15 years. We're currently revising those. We'll talk more about that at some point. But there's been no failure of any building that's been built in accordance with those standards in any way at all. So I'm very proud of that. Thank you. Yeah, I do get to review some failed buildings. It mostly relates to lack of weather protection. So we're revising the standards, and I can actually, this is a project that's become mired in bureaucratic nonsense again, but I can announce here that as of last week, in fact, at least half the funding required from government departments to complete the revisions has been found, and the rest will become available. I'd hope it's an intersectional straw bale building into these standards. Standard New Zealand was supportive, as were others, but this move was not completely supported by straw bale practitioners. But yeah, the major challenge for consenting for straw bale is mostly dealing with external moisture. And a real big challenge for the straw bale industry is to really think about how we can incorporate a drainage plane inside our plaster layers so we don't get enormous overhangs to keep the wind-driven rain off, which is a real issue in New Zealand. Anyway, earthquakes are up in the air, going to tip everything on its head. The most important environmentally sustainable building is the one you never build. And here's my wife in a 10-star rated building. You know, I hate these tick box rating systems and pox them, I say. But, you know, every built environment move has an immense impact on the natural environment. And there's a very long history of Kiwis building for themselves. Future Prime Ministers down to the most disadvantaged. And that's when I had quite a revelation during this talk. I thought, most of the images I've collected, the buildings I like, they're only built. And New Zealand has a tradition of building little holiday houses, batches, cribs, mountain huts. Farmers build themselves sheds. Some New Zealand architects regard the shed as an archetypical building here, and this is reflected in the house design. But the other important thing is that building is also a verb. You know, it's a noun. We think of buildings as an object. It's actually the process. And the owner building thing has been a fantastically important part of the natural building movement. I believe it still is. Tony Watkins, who's pictured on the left there, is a friend, architect, planner, writer. One of his great quotes I really love is, he says, getting someone else to build your house for you is like getting someone else to make love for you. You can expand that at great length. But yeah, another friend of mine, Russell Andrews, sadly died a few years ago, his wife Flower, they ran the Australasian Owner Builder magazine, helped a lot of people into their houses. And of course there's a huge range of books around now about how to build your house and how to build natural buildings. Some of the authors of some of these really useful and wonderful books are here with us today, in their own magazine, Earth Building. But yeah, I just pulled out a few photos. I'm going to run through this very fast. The photos of owner-built buildings in New Zealand. Some you've seen, there's a few which just thrown in just for the hell of it. The beauty, the range, the diversity is quite remarkable. I was going to put in Mount Eden Prison too, because that was built by prisoners. I thought that's probably in bad taste. But yeah, some of you here will recognise your own houses, some of you recognise the houses you've developed with, some of you will help build some of these houses. So we don't have to linger on these, but it's just extraordinary what people do when you give them a chance. Yeah. Only an owner builder could do a building like this. So, you know, so a pox on debt fueled economies, a pox on planners and the homogenistic schemes, a pox on the rule makers who inhibit. So, yeah, what's the point of owner building really? I mean, the hug factor. Every part of every building that a person has built themselves will tell a story, but it's more than that. It's the community gets involved, the friends, the parties, the celebration. And every part of the home has that sort of thumbprint, exuberant thumbprint of its owner on it. And it's the warmth that a thermometer does not measure. It's the hug when you go in there. It's the person stroking the woodwork. It's the person who pats your earth walls. Or it's a very extreme case. I had someone came and kissed my earth floor. He was from Eastern Europe, so hey, he wasn't the Pope. But in parts of the UK and Europe, it's mandated that some areas are set aside, 5 to 10% in some cases, for owner builders. Do a development, a new piece of land, some of that land has to be put aside for owner building, not here. So where to? Well, let's think of a tendril seeking support, maybe metamorphosis. Interesting experience I had recently. I got involved with an airship-inspired project, partly against my better judgment, but anyway, I got caught up in it. And there was a builder there, Ben Garrett from Canada, some of you may know him. And he told me something which was really stuck in my mind. He gave a good crew talk every day, and he said, please be careful today, as you're all going to feel really shitty and scratchy. He said, but it's not you. Today we'll be working with steel and concrete, and it's the materials affecting you. And it's absolutely true, isn't it? Knows what is used with this stuff. So we've got to get natural materials more widely used. Some of us are working on compliance issues, some of us are working on industrialisation. There's all these things. One movement we've made, one move we've made. Here you go. Yeah. It was hell, I tell you. The concept of creating a New Zealand Centre for Appropriate Building Technology is something I've held for a long time. In 2010 I got an Winston Churchill Fellowship, and it enabled me to make a study to Europe to look at various appropriate alternative technology centres. There is a talk on YIMFI coming up later, yes, in my front yard, but I'm not going to labour it. We see people wearing the YIMFI t-shirt, you can talk to them about it. But YIMFI has the potential to make a significant contribution to natural building research and use in New Zealand. It needs your support. I've always said building's both a noun and a verb. And I think we need to keep that in mind. We need technology to set a time, place, culture, and environment, using local materials to do useful work. 5. Okay, nearly there. Technology. I love technology and science. Love it. Vast benefits it's given us. We've just found gravitational waves. There's been a 200-year project since the idea of trying to work out what gravity is. 100 years ago, Einstein postulated what it was. Now it's been detected, gravitational waves. To do that, they had to measure the deflection in a laser beam. It was less than 1,000th the diameter of a protein. Absolutely incredible. Defies language. But even more scary, here's a picture of my step-granddaughter, 18 months old, bottle of milk and a tablet. Using it better than I could. So yeah, the technology we're looking at is a little simpler than some of that. Not all of it, but some of it's based on science as well. But the whole point of natural building technology, as David Eisenberg will tell you any length you care to talk to him about it. The point of having stuff close by is that unintended consequences are found out real fast and learning is accelerated. And that's why we need to have stuff nearby us and use stuff that we're happy to have nearby us. Here's Central Auckland, one of the streets right in the middle of the central building in the CBD of Auckland. I helped a sculptor erect a Danish sculptor, Rikke Luther, put up a sculpture in the Auckland City Art Gallery. It was a small earth building that was designed to collapse during the course of the exhibition. But the good thing about this, we was unloading our truck and a parking order came down the street. We were legally parked, of course. There's no arrest to pay. And this guy came along and just looked at us. And he tripped over a plate of this footpath. And he looked at us and he dived into a bookshop on the other side of the road. And he kept looking at us through the window, but he didn't come out. And then the street sweeper came up the road. He'd down picking up the bits of stuff. And he looked up and saw us. It's great. But this should be an everyday scene. It shouldn't be a freak scene. The Smithsonian gets it. Somebody come across this. They made some very dire predictions about what's going to happen in the next 40 years as part of their 40th anniversary publication in 2012. Their first dire prediction was that sophisticated buildings will be made of mud. They should have added straw, but they didn't. Their second dire prediction was that coral reefs will be devastated, and the third was that the catch of the day will be jellyfish, and I went on and on and on. But they're actually put forward sophisticated buildings being of mud as a good thing. So, yeah, where does it leave us? What we need is a school of natural building. It's a palpable need, we've got to have it. We've got to set it up somehow, and what I want to talk to people here is about how we might do it. So please come and talk to me if you think we can do this. If we can set up a place where we can research, experiment, teach. But, you know, there's a lot of natural materials that we'd like to try out. Jeepers, I mean, I haven't even talked about things like bamboo, not other nice materials yet. But don't talk to me about any of the materials that have got that sea stuff in it. And don't talk to me about all that's toxic. And don't talk to me about hempcrete unless it's local hemp and has no cement in it. And don't talk about straw bale if you want to use cement-based plasters. And don't talk about industrialised systems that may disempower people just as well as any other factory. But do come and talk. If we can set up a natural building school that looks at ways we can use localised natural materials. It supports designs that insulate people from the outside, but rather embrace the environment that gives us life. And we want buildings that are appropriate for place and use, and that assist people into building for themselves or trains people to do it for them. And please do come and talk to me if you have access to funds or resources that help set this up. So here we go. There's a few challenges, a few things to think about. At the end of the conference, I think I'm leading a discussion on what happens in the next 84 years of the 21st century. Well, who can predict the future? You know, my father said the world chops and changes, and boy, he lived through a lot. I've also seen a lot in my lifetime, but imagine what this ancient tree, Tani the Huta, god of the forest, has lived through. One of our great kauri trees from the far north. So who can predict the future? And there's a lot to talk about. And there's lots of fun to be had together while we are together. So really, on behalf of one of our oldest inhabitants, I welcome those of you from overseas once again to New Zealand, and those from around New Zealand to here. And thanks for your attention, and I hope you've enjoyed this introduction. But one last thing before I go.